Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here today with us. I'm Karla Ferrer. I'm head of marketing of the Eclipse Foundation. The Eclipse Foundation has been joining this event for many, many years, and we are very happy to welcome all of you to this roundtable. So today with us, we will discuss about the future of the open source business in Europe. And we are very happy to have with us Peter GANTEN, co-founder and member of the management board of APELL, Julian Coccia, CTO of SCANOSS, Etienne JULIOT, co-founder of Obeo, and Timo VALIHARJU, co-founder and member of the management board of APELL. All right, so to start, I would like to ask you, please, to introduce yourself and a little bit about your company so our guest here can also understand more about what you do. Do you mind, Timo, start? And maybe we just go one by one right after?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah. Okay, so as said, my name is Timo VALIHARJU and I'm a CEO of Finnish Open Source Finland and also one of the founders of APELL, but my more longer role is as an entrepreneur. So I started to be entrepreneur in 2000. I established a company called Mediamaisteri, which is an e-learning company that is doing quite a lot of work with Moodle platform, if you know the LMS system in open source LMS. And the company size is 3.5 million euros, so it's a small company, but it's based only in open source as in Moodle and some other components that we also put into our service. So we are hosting Moodle services. We are training people to use it, pedagogy, e-learning strategies with Moodle, and also content to Moodle. So we do, for example, for the companies compliance courses and maybe distributor courses to the global markets and so on. We are market leader in Finland, and we do quite a lot of big organizations, most of the universities, polytechnics, big companies, like Kone Corporation, if you know the elevator company, we will do quite a lot of work with them, and also in governmental agencies. So for example, Finnish Defense Forces are our customers, so Finnish Army actually do most of the training, e-learning training through our systems, and we will help them to do that. So that's basically my background. So pretty straightforward open source business, and of course to some extent development, but mainly hosting and developing services.
Thank you, Timo. Peter?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Peter. I originally have studied psychology and a little bit of physics, and then founded my own company, which is called Univention. We are devoted to open source identity and access management, application integration, application portals. We are also, I think, still a small company with something like 120 people, mostly active in the German-speaking market. But our products are 100% open source software. They are used by something like 14,000 organizations all over the world. The biggest one actually is here in France. It's Orange. They use it for their as the foundation for their mail and application framework with more than 31 million users. So we know that it scales to some extent. And in my spare time, I'm very active in open source public affairs work. I'm a co-founder of the Open Source Business Alliance, which is the German industry association with now, I think we had the 199th member last week, so we are expecting to get to 200 members this year. Some bigger members. Eclipse is also a member we are very proud of, but also organizations like Deutsche Telekom, Red Hat SUSE, obviously, and a number of medium-sized and smaller businesses. And together with Timo and also with Stéphane Fermiger of CNLL, we founded APELL, which is an European umbrella association of the national industry associations in Finland, in Germany and France, to have a better presentation in Brussels. And we are happy that now, I think, 4 more or 5 more states joined APELL. And if you are from an organization of a country which is not yet represented in APELL, you have to join us.
Thank you very much, Peter. Etienne, please, can you introduce?
Hello, I'm Etienne Juliot. I'm from Obeo. I'm a founder of Obeo that we created in 2005. So it was quite a long ago compared to the maturity of open source, especially when you want to be a software editor with a business model based on software editions with a fair business model with the open source community. We start from scratch without any funding. It is still the case today. We grow until 50%. So it's a good success, especially because we also propose our solution worldwide. We are contacted from any country, from any continent, to work on our core knowledge, which is based on the creation of modeling tools. When I speak about modeling, I speak about visual tools, like diagramming tools, with structured data beyond the scene, to be able to do engineering trade-off, to describe process, describe IT architectures, and also to target also system engineering, which is specific market for the industry, which explains that we are lots of contact of very large industry all over the world. When I created Obeo, so 17 years ago, I did the choice, strong choice to create a DNA focus on open source. It's something which is really a core business, a core DNA of the company, with an open core model, but a fair open core model, which means that you can use for real, at industry, at production ready level, the tools which is open source, and you can have some other future based on this, because we want to have, I can say, viable and sustainable, fair models, not purely based on services, to have a cash flow, because the tools is easy to use and without any bugs. So I can explain later.
Thank you.
And I'm in charge at Obeo of the international development of the company. That's why I'm here.
Thank you, Etienne.
Hi, my name is Julian Coccia, and I am the CTO of SCANOSS, a Spanish company based in Madrid. And I also run the project office at the Software Transparency Foundation, also based in Madrid. SCANOSS is a software composition analysis platform. For those not familiar with that, it's a tool that discovers the open source in your software. Why will you want to do that? Well, you will think that you know the open source you're using if you're using package managers, or if you're programming languages that have declared dependencies. But the reality is that there is a declared reality, and then there is an undeclared reality. In the software we make today is almost entirely open source, 75% according to the Forrester Wave last year. GitHub says 85 to 90%, and we just pull a Frankenstein together. We just bring all these components and we put our logic on top. And the act of bringing open source into a software is almost involuntary today. Developers tend to copy and paste from Stack Overflow, for example, which everybody thinks is okay, but actually it is not, because Stack Overflow is a Creative Commons by attribution license, which means that if you're going to use that code, then your code has to be released also under the same license, which might be incompatible with your business model, depending on what you're doing with that. And it's even more involuntary if you use tools like GitHub Copilot. As you start typing the code, it just auto-completes the code. Theoretically, that code is actually learned with machine learning, and it's not as something that matches exactly the source code used for learning. But in practice, you will find that in many cases you do have a verbatim copy of someone else's job. So if someone else's work ends up in your product, it doesn't matter if you copied it or if it was your neighbor or Copilot or the divine providence, you will be responsible when you distribute that. So the license compliance risk is one of the risks of using open source. There are more like vulnerabilities, and you know that is a problem. And there are other technical risks. There's trade compliance, export control, and so on. So you need to know your software composition. You cannot talk cybersecurity before knowing what you're using. You cannot talk about compliance, license compliance, if you don't know what you're using. It's difficult to protect or to comply with things that you don't know you have. Now, how do you find the things that are not declared? How do you find that piece of code you copied from Stack Overflow, or how do you find out that what Copilot composed is matching someone else's work? Well, you need to build a knowledge base of known open source, and that is what we did. We have the biggest knowledge base in the market. We have downloaded all GitHub, all Ruby gems, all Maven, all the public repositories, and we continuously, because as you can imagine, every second there are multiple new versions published. So we keep all that in this massive knowledge base. We downloaded over 2 petabytes of source code. That's 175 million URLs, 100 billion files, 3 trillion lines of code. And yet we can take a file with 100 lines and tell you what is matching in microseconds in commodity hardware. Everything we do is open source. We sell access to this database, and we make all the back-end, front-end, CLIs, UIs, everything open source to facilitate subscriptions to this data. And we do provide a free tier of data through the Software Transparency Foundation. And maybe I'm just getting ahead of myself because you're going to be asking more questions.
Thank you, Julian.
I'll pause there.
No, thank you, very interesting. So I think, Peter, you wanted to comment?
If I'm allowed,
I would
do one little comment.
Please.
Yes.
I think what you are doing is very, very important, but still there's one thing I definitely do not like. Because what you are explaining is not a problem of open source software.
No.
And you are telling us that the software people are using is not open source software. But still, this is advertised to the public always as if you are using open source, please be careful. No, it's if you are developing software and copying stuff from somewhere, you have to be careful. And we must be very careful with what we are telling people here, because I get this constantly back from the government spaces. Oh, well, open source, I've heard that's very dangerous. There might be things in it.
Yeah, no.
and there might be things in proprietary software as well.
Of course.
That's my point.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we agree.
It's the same. The risk, yeah, you can have vulnerabilities in code that you write yourself.
Yes.
And you can have vulnerabilities. The thing is, since most of the code is open source, is 75 or 85 or 90%, then your compliance, security, and everything will come mostly from the open source part.
Which is true for proprietary software
Absolutely,
as well.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that comment as well, Peter. So since we are already in this discussion about the business, so can you please tell us how specifically open source is helping your own business in your own different markets? So I don't know who would like to start.
I can start.
Sure, thank you.
So from my point of view, there wouldn't be business for me if there wouldn't be open source. so it's everything is based on open source, and I would say that at the time when I founded the company, it would have been very, very expensive and very, very difficult to penetrate to the markets by doing some proprietary solution that actually is like some other proprietary solutions. So I think that we would have been in bankrupt in a couple of years if we would try that. It would have been very, very expensive and very risky to invest all the money to the proprietary model. So my background training is Master of Education, and 2000 I was probably only crazy people in Finland that actually did kind of open source as a service. So and the model was totally different. Nobody actually knew it, what it was. Particularly customers were completely messed up that what's open source, and even me, it was a little bit difficult concept at that time. And most of the first maybe 6 to 7 years, maybe 10 years, I was basically selling open source concept to the customers, not the product as such. So the product was only a side effect of that I could convince them that what is open source, and it's wise you to go to this model, not to the proprietary model. So in that sense, it's totally vital for us, and we have been doing that since. So everything we do, we do it in open source, and also contribute as much as we can to the communities, particularly Moodle community. But of course, it's nowadays quite difficult to get your contributions to the communities, as you probably know. So there's a lot of people contributing them, and also different models and visions maybe that what they do in the community. So for us, it's totally impossible to do something else than open source. Yeah.
On my side, I will say that there are two main points which are the benefits of open source. The first one is the sustainability. When you compete with big players like, I don't know, IBM, Microsoft, Dassault, and others, one key aspect is not the cost, it's not the future, is the sustainability. Will you be still here in 1 decade? What happens if me as a decision maker, I take the risk to use your technology and you fail because it's not a big player in the market. With open source, it's clearly a game changer there, because you can say that in 30, 50 years, the technology will be still available. Perhaps not more maintained, it depends on the funding of the customer, but at least it is pseudo-infinite reliability of the technology, and it is clear, it is key in the enablement, in the diffusion of the technology. And I think it is a benefit which is not so much pushed in the argument when you create an open source technology. The second one is the marketing. I completely agree with you that open source is really an enabler to spread the word worldwide. If you just host your project or your product on your own website, you need an effort in terms of funding, which is just awesome. You need to do advertisement everywhere. It's very, very complex. With open source, you generate champions. Champions, there are several words for this, or sponsors, which means that people which are inside, behind the wall of your customer, we will spend the weekend, spend some time on their own to experiment your technology without the need to do a purchase order, just to experiment, to innovate. And after, because it's open source, they will create a kind of passion for your technology, and they will push other colleagues to adopt this, still without any purchase order, so it's going everywhere. And after a level of usage, they will need some other value that you have to propose in a pay mode this time, by services or license. And this different way to penetrate the market is clearly something which scale and which require less investment, and which is really a big value of open source.
Thank you, Etienne. I don't know if anybody, Peter or Julian, you want to add anything?
I can add two main advantages also an open source business model versus a proprietary one. And in our case, this solution that we have today, it existed already for 20 years. There are other players in the industry with software composition analysis, those that are proprietary. And for us, when you're the first open source, I mean, a business that is based on proprietary software has a time window. You can exploit this today, but if the need is global, at some point in the future, someone will do this in an open source way. And that is when you start running behind someone trying to catch up, because that is so you have to actually, it's, from the business perspective, you can exploit proprietary, but you have to be ready for someone to make the first step, and you want to be the one who makes that first step. So what happens when you go open source, and in our case, we're the first open source solution, is that you become a de facto standard. And a proprietary tool is a proprietary tool. Now, when you do this open source, then other people start to use your open source, and then you just came up with the bar that measures and solves the problem. The results that you get when you scan your code with SCANOSS are the same results that you get when you scan with Fossology, which is a tool mainly maintained by Siemens today, or with Fosslight, a tool maintained and developed by LG, or ORT, developed by Bosch IO and HERE Technologies. These three open source tools tap into our knowledge base and use the same algorithm for comparing snippets of code. So that the problem is solved. So this is extremely disruptive. That is your advantage. You have something that is extremely disruptive, creates a lot of problem for the companies that have proprietary solutions. Then another advantage that it has is that it shortens your sales cycles. When you have a proprietary solution, you want people to evaluate your tool, you need to sign an evaluation agreement. I mean, it's a proprietary license that you're giving for free for a specific purpose and a specific time. And when you deal especially with large companies, this is a process that could take 2 or 3 months just to get an evaluation agreement in place. And and then, of course, once you get that, then still the sales cycles could be years. But in our case, usually, companies try out, we don't know, they just download it and start using it, and they implement it, and then they start a pilot project, and then they say, okay, well, now we want to get a maintained version. So they contact us when they have already evaluated, they have already run a test pilot. So that results in a much shorter sales cycle. On the downside, you don't have any idea of who's evaluating your tool, what they're doing with it, because that's when you do have a proprietary solution, you keep close to your customer during an evaluation, and you make sure that they don't get the wrong assumption or and they get stuck in something. So you go and walk along with them. Well, here, you just don't know. So it's really difficult to have a clear view of a sales funnel, for example.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian. Yes, Peter.
Maybe I can add. So most of the things have been said. Open source enables us to do our business at all. It lowers innovation barriers and market entry barriers. It helps with sales, with marketing, with distribution. Yeah. But another thing is that, especially during the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, governments and also industries increasingly understood that for them it's also a value to be able to control and to shape the technology they can use. So it's a real business advantage, which we of course are also proposing to them and also are describing to them. So we are driving this from 2 ways. We are explaining it and we are delivering the solutions for it. I think that's the best approach, and it works. And you can't do it with proprietary software.
I not fully agree.
Okay.
Because I saw sometimes some industrials, which are not software editors, which say, okay, there is a way now to create technology and to spread the technology beyond our wall. And they do open source project and they diffuse it. And they don't understand sometimes that being a software editor is really a different job than being an industrials. It means that you not have to do the code, you have to create the community, create marketing, create event, do support, do maintenance, where your internal requests are not at a higher level of priority than the other adopters outside of your own company. And that's a different business. And I saw several times some disappointment of big industrials, which imagine that they can dream that they can become software editors just because of open source, and that they fail because of the lack of understanding that it is a different job. So I think
I agree.
Yeah, but I like to be in a kind of table and to say one time I did agree. It was a pleasure.
But the question was, how did open source help our businesses to be successful? Yeah. And you are totally right that there are many, many challenges to do open source in the right way. It's not an easy thing, and it's also not easy to build a sustainable business out of an open source software. And we need to speak about that totally.
Yeah, and I would say that when we are talking about open source, we mainly think technological, software and coding and blah, blah, blah. But for my opinion, I think that the open source is not the tech, it's not the software, actually, it's the community. Because without the community, it's impossible to do open source. So basically, all the elements of successful open source business actually is based on the work of the community and how it does things. And there's two main components. So you can do the community yourself, which is a pretty difficult thing to do, or you can join some other community that are hosted by some other people and try to create business out of that. That we made that. And also in Finland, there is a trend actually in the municipalities that they are starting to co-create open source projects. So for example, in Finland there was in city of Espoo there was a legacy system for daycare ERP system. So what they did, they put 10 million euros money, competed with the companies, and now they have a open source daycare ERP system. And the community is now larger, so there's 6 big cities in Finland that actually is the community. They are funding it, they are contributing it, and they release the code. So basically, anybody of you would actually be able to create business for daycare ERP system, for example, in Spain or in France or whatever. So I think that the market is changing, and the possibilities are in a way that we need to, see the business through open source. Mm-hmm. It's not anymore the competition open source proprietary. Even the proprietary companies are always, they need to think also first open source and then something else. Microsoft, big companies, they are too small companies to compete with open source concept. That's how it is.
Thank you very much. I'm thinking that maybe if there are any questions in the audience, please. Yes, there is a microphone, if you don't mind, because we are recording. Oh, thank you.
Hello, my name is Baptiste. I work for a small French company which is dealing with a Spanish software which is called Decidim, which is making participatory democracy. So basically the software was built at first by the Ayuntament de Barcelona, so the city of Barcelona, and we are slowly making a transition from software which is managed by an institution to a software managed by many companies, also universities, organizations. And my question was about did you have to work with like institutions? Were you like at the beginning working for an institution, or did you receive fund or have relations with like public institutions, public money? If I can give an example, there is a German initiative currently which is called the Sovereign Tech Fund, which is like the German government deciding to put 10 million on the table to finance directly open source projects for the infrastructure project, like for example CURL, which is a library widely used. So my question was about do you think you have to lobby about a bit the public sector in order for them to give basically money for the open source world?
Thank you.
I guess it really depends on the company and the business model. Some people do count on funding or grants from the government, and that's one way. You don't care about the actual value of the company because someone is paying you to do the thing, so you don't worry much. You're just sponsored by the government, and that's fine, because then you are fixing a problem, and the government is helping you to succeed. In our case, we don't have anything like that. This company's been created from scratch privately, and there is no funds from the government or at all. There's been no grants. So maybe I propose, because I have not seen that in the agenda, can we talk about the challenges of creating an open source business model? That's one solution. Someone pays, you get money from the government, you just build that. But I think that the main challenge for an open source business model is where is the value of the company? When you make proprietary software, the value of your IP is your software. You license that software, and then your company has a value because of the software that you have. And that is interesting to investors, for example, because you do have a value. Now, if you go open source, open source tends to be driven a lot by fanatism, like I like this, I want to be open source, and you go, but you really have to think of where is the value, because if you're just gonna do something that is free and then you charge to a company to get support, then you just become a support business. So you're just providing consulting. There's no actual value other than your team. I mean, the only value you have is your human resources, basically. And the business of providing consulting is not as interesting as the business of selling licenses for something that has a value.
Right.
So that is one big challenge in this world. And that is how many open source business models fail, because they fail to actually create value. So that is maybe one aspect, but that's one solution. I mean, I don't care. I just get 10 million from the government and I just build it, and that's totally fine. But not everybody has that luck.
Yeah, I think that the public administration in general is not that very good business model, because they change. Governments change, politicians change, and maybe some other things say. So it just can't stop like that. So there is no sustainable doing contracts kind of in support way with the government or some other city or some other party. So
there is one. There is one, because there was a public funding as a purchase order from a public authority, but there are also some, if you do innovations, there are some institutions at the European scale, like Horizon Europe or ETEA, which fund you if you do a collaborative project, which means that you have to join a project with a big player, labs, SME and others, and you work together on to solve a challenge, an issue of the state of the art. And with this, you are, as a SME, you can have good funding there, and it's usually some sustainable strategy, because Europe do this on several decades. There is here Philippe. Can raise your hand. He's director of research at Eclipse Foundation, and he helps companies like yours to understand how it works around the open source project.
But it's not, for my opinion, it's not business model. It's a product development model that you are funding.
Good point. That's a company which failed in the issue to create this as a business model, and that's clearly not the idea. It's helps you to take the risk to hire. That's my feeling.
I think that's a very important point. It is a good thing that governments are funding development of open source, and we should encourage them to do that. I think we should also ask governments to give higher fundings if the results are put under a open source license, because then it will be of more value for society. It can be reused by others, even if the original receiver of the funding will not use it, what happens a lot of times. But these are not scaling business models. And we want to build software in the end because customers like to use the software and they want to pay for the value they're getting from the software. And then, of course, there is an issue with open source. But I think there are good ways to work around it. But these have to be discussed. And the problem sometimes is that for different offerings and different solutions, the ways how you can work around it are different. I experienced this, for example, we are involved in the, maybe some of you have heard about it, in the Phoenix project. It's a project by the German government to build an alternative to Microsoft 365, basically. And it has a best of breed strategy, so it's taking existing software like Open Exchange and Nextcloud and Matrix Elements and others, and we provide the identity management layer. And they want this under one open source license. And now we are discussing with all these vendors, and they have completely different models and little thingies there where they don't like to be it as open as you would think that it would be. And for good reason, of course, because this code would not have been written if there would not have been a business model. So, and we need to find the right way through there, and there's not yet the one solution. But I think we need more standardized solutions for this, because they will be easier understandable by customers.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm still here.
Good.
No, I was wondering, because we still have 2 questions, but maybe before that, since we have a few minutes just to ask it to the audience, because I think it's very important what we are discussing right now. Philippe, do you mind going in the back? Thank you.
Yeah, so Philippe Krief, Eclipse Foundation. I have a question. If we receive frequently this kind of question when people visit our booth or anywhere like that, is what are the main question we have to ask to ourselves if we want to start this wonderful journey of the open source in a business way?
I think we already answered this question. Which value will I deliver to my customer for which the customer will pay in order that I still can run my business?
Yeah, where is the value?
If you can't answer that question, you will have a problem paying the people writing the code.
And if you get a grant initially, at that point, that grant comes to an end. You exhaust that money, and then you have ongoing expenses and salaries and things to pay, and then the problem you have if you're counting on a next grant is the timing.
Yeah,
because when you have a business model that is appealing to investors, people just come and knock on your door looking to invest, and that private investing is a lot faster than waiting for 6 months or 8 months or a year to get a grant.
Yeah.
So think about that. I mean, that initial ticket has to be, it's useful, but you need to have a business model that makes sense, and you have to build something that has value.
Yeah, I think that the business is business. We are just doing it with open source.
Yes,
it's not that simple. That difficult thing to imagine. So if your business model is not viable in every way, you cannot do it with proprietary way or in open source way. So that's how it goes. So experience says that it would be very nice that you have really some idea that you can actually help the customers, not just doing some code. because of the code.
On
Yeah.
the positive side, on the positive side, we have evolved a lot, and now investors, there are VCs looking for open source business models. And you know, up until a few years ago, it was very difficult. I mean, an investor, open source, no, there's no value in that. They could not understand it. But now these things changed. So luckily today is easier to attract funds.
I think the fact that IBM bought Red Hat for I think $38 billion was really an eye opener to the whole venture capital industry. And well, that's only open source software, and they are paid. It's the highest transaction, and that was really helpful. Yeah, and it proves that there are viable business models which scale.
Yeah, I think that when you look about the history, for example, in open source business sort of, so I was coming to think a couple of weeks ago that do I know any CMS system that is proprietary? And I don't. There is none anymore in the market. So in CMS, content management system, like Drupal or something like that. So everything is actually open source. Nobody is using proprietary anymore. And I would say that
I know one.
Okay.
You spelled it.
He's more experienced. But I think that the trend goes in every business and in vertical areas go in a way to open source. So maybe in 20 years, even in the hospital management systems are open source. But if I would like to start an open source company now, I would probably find some area that is almost all in proprietary code and dominated by proprietary code, and then look the version of open source or maybe some starting open source project and join there and starting to invade to the proprietary market. So in our world in open source, I think that the red market it's good, because if you go to the blue market, which is comfortable for you, that this Japanese strategic thinker said that it's blue ocean strategy. You probably heard about that. So in open source, you need to go red ocean all the time. Don't go blue. It's killing you. So
there is one aspect I was expecting maybe you will mention, and you mentioned during the conversation, it's about the community itself. There is one aspect in business, when you talk business to business, that open source provides that proprietary business that doesn't always provide, which is a community aspect. How do you, as a businessman, manage this community aspect of the open source to make it sustainable?
Perfect. It was my point.
That's a good question. Yep.
Yeah, and so there are several rules, and there was not only one rules to do a good business model, but I saw two best practice I would like to share today. One, and it will help to solve your questions, it's to create a software which is modular and which could be extendable by add-ons. You can see lots of successful open source product, where you have a core, and you can create new add-on to extend the feature, to add new capabilities to the tool. And it's easier to create a community by letting people not contribute directly to the core, which is quite hard because you are not part of the core teams and you are afraid to break something, but just by providing an add-ons. And it's also a good way to propose proprietary add-ons, to propose adding value, and it is where you put the value to do, okay, you can use the software for free, but if you want to connect it to your IT because you need, I don't know, Oracle dependency, Active Directory, authentications, stuff like this, okay, you have to pay for this kind of feature. So thinking about modularity, I think it's, of course, a good architecture way, but also a good business model. The second point, I miss this one. We come back there later.
Okay, while you get that one back, I can add something a little related to what you suggest. Think also of how can you improve other existing communities, other existing open source businesses. So if you do something that you can sell directly, or you can also sell indirectly through partnerships with other existing open source projects, that's also something that will bring it will bring adoption of your technology. Because if you make something that is open source, one of the things that you want is to get a critical mass of people using it. You need to get adoption. And you can do that on your own, you can create your own community, or you can join other communities that already have users, and you're providing a solution, improving what they already have. So make plugins for yourself, and so you can increase the modularity of your model, but also improve someone else's models by offering something that can be consumed indirectly.
I would like to add one point. First of all, I think you should decide on the way you want to go there. Not everybody who is putting something under a open source license will want to build a big community. And I think that's okay. It's still open source. It has still all the benefits of open source software. And you know, you need to know which way you want to go and what you want to achieve. And then when you decide, well, others should use it and others should even contribute to it, then, and I think that's what you also said, you need to ask yourself, which value do I bring to them? You need to sell it also. Like you sell your business product, there must be a value for them to use it and to to contribute to it. And then, of course, you need all these policy and governance questions to solve, where Eclipse, for example, can help you with.
I want to add a bit of a word of encouragement, because it seems like it's all downsides and things that you need to resolve. But one thing, and following what Timo said about don't be afraid to go red ocean, which for those not familiar with the marketing term means to go into a territory where there is already many existing solutions, proprietary. Don't be afraid of making something that will compete with a large company offering something similar as proprietary. The bigger the company, the more difficult will be for that company to pivot and change to an open source model. Because you will think, okay, I'll do this, but they are so big, and then they will do it. They will just do like this, and then my product is no longer. But that's not going to happen. I mean, the bigger the company, the more difficult it is. It's just think of an elephant. I mean, how long it takes for that elephant to turn around and go in another direction. So that's something that runs on your benefit.
Yeah. One comment to your question. So that, for me, the relationship to the community, it's very difficult and delicate issue for the business, because if the community vanish, our business is basically done. So our model collapses at the same moment that the community stops to work. Or if the community changes maybe license terms, or maybe maybe they will be acquired by a venture capital company or something like that, and then the model changes or something like that. And these are actually notable risks for the company, and we think that all the time actually. And that's basically the only nightmare that I'm having in open source business, that the relationship between the community disrupts somehow for some reason that we cannot actually to say up front that we couldn't believe that this could happen is the thing that I don't want to say in the. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
To come back on the red ocean or blue ocean, we did another part that what you propose. When we create our flagship product named Sirius, we could create this tool in a red ocean mode by competing directly with other big players, and we choose exactly the opposite, to go in the blue one, to create a kind of no-code tooling to create your specific and your own graphical designer. And the idea was to create something new, innovative, and the open source business model was an enabler for this, because who want to create his own graphical editors? For what? If you need first to justify why you need to buy a software without to know what you will do with this software, you will not have the budget. So using the open source to first build a product, create your own use case, your own innovation, and you really start from scratch at this point, was clearly an enabler for us, because this product previously was a commercial one. And we were really faced on this barrier of buy the tools before knowing what will be the benefit. So, and it was really something which was completely new in the market. And thanks to open source, it completely changed. And in terms of value, for us, we in the introduction, I say we create a fair value and predefined value. So we put the value on the collaborations. It means that if you want to collaborate, like in Google Docs, in live, you have to pay. It's clear. It's open with the community. I remember the second point I forgot just previously. It was about the hosting model. We can see lots more and more open source project and business model where you put in the open the code, the binary, and because you work a lot on the trademark, you are the de facto standard for a hosting version and ready-to-use versions of your tools. Let's take an example, the Plex Media Center. It's an open source project. You can download it, do anything you want. But come on, you just have to go to plex.tv, you put your login and password, and it's run. And if anybody else can create a competitor to Plex, the company behind Plex, but just, it's so simple that nobody will do.
Why would you? Yes.
Sorry?
Why would you?
Yeah, sure.
Right.
And I think as the web is becoming everywhere, even for business tools, for the industry and others, I think this model will grow for the next decade.
We will need to stop. Sorry about that, but we are running out of time. I want to thank you, everyone, for your very interesting participation. And yeah, I think there are already people waiting. But thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.